right?
And I don't know if you guys have seen, there was an article, I think it's been circulated around like in the Atlantic. And I like to read a lot of Andy Slavitz's stuff. He's the former head of CMS, and he, from my perspective, seems like a very balanced person. But his whole thing is like, hey, if we kind of want to get to any semblance of normalcy, meaning, kids being able to attend schools, sporting events being able to be, held with people in attendance, people feeling comfortable eating inside, whatever, that it would require the US to go down on like I think he's saying like a 90% lockdown for likely 6 to 8 weeks. Truly, he's like, what we did wasn't lockdown. He's like, that was like 50%. But he's we didn't follow the data that we had from other countries and really do what was necessary. And obviously now we're all in this like, Groundhog's Day shit show with no end in sight. But he's like, it's clear what we need to do. He's like, the data is irrefutable because we have all this information and data from other countries that have in fact done it. But will the United States be able to like get it together? And this would require a coordinated federal response.
I think it's too late personally. Not to be like down, but like it's like so far gone. Like we missed that opportunity. So now it seems like an unfortunate situation where like the economics are going to drive things more so, or they're driving things, and then we try to, the best we can, not forget about the ethics and the morals of the situation. I don't know.
Yeah, what do you think, David? Because I know you got opinions.
Yeah, all sorts of fun opinions. I don't know if they're accurate or not. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think to your point, Ryan, that the chance was when we seemingly had everybody buy into that. All right, I'll stay home for a month back in like April or whatever, or May. Mm-hmm. That would have been nice.
Shut down interstates, throw out the National Guard. Like it would have been crazy.
Yeah.
Like
no interstate travel, closed borders.
And
we had a bunch of buy-in too, and like people were like, buy local food and like support local food. It's great. And then, the downside is that we also know there are a lot of negative health impacts associated with poverty and low SES and things like that. And so that is like a real thing that fits into the conversation on decision making. But I think one thing I keep coming back to is the lack of coordination of governments and bodies around, and scientific bodies around the country and the world. But also the importance of discipline-specific communication with non-discipline audiences. And like we talk about that a lot in behavior analysis and science, and we've seen some of that with COVID. But like in hearing the conversation today too, it also sounds like that's an issue with policy, law, policy. Like there's all this.
Can you give us some examples
going on? Yeah. So I think it was Michelle talking earlier about staying on top of legislation. And that can be hard if you're in the field. And if I'm trying to consume that literature, I can't probably. It's probably impossible for me to just pick that up and read it. So what obligations, like ethical obligations, do policy people, analysts, lobbyists have to make it consumable to the average American? As scientists, what is our obligation to make the latest randomized controlled trial with COVID vaccines consumable to the American population? Or
how do we translate this? How do we translate this into layman's terms so that, the average person can understand it, and then be able to follow potentially action that can be helpful to everyone because they're like, oh, this makes sense to me because you said these and these things. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of really bad peer-reviewed science that's gone on during COVID too. Scientists sitting at home without access to a lab is a bad idea. They need to be back where they belong. So it's also a challenge because if you're not translating it well and the caveats and the limits to the science that happens, then people get confused and they start mistrusting it. And I can see the same with policy. If there's flip-flopping and changing, then.
And Dr. Halliday and I were talking yesterday, and she said one of the issues has been that what you see happening in the media is that they're picking up on these studies before they've ever been peer-reviewed, and then pushing them out as factual information. And, even within, media organizations, they may not also really kind of understand, like, well, what are the primary tenets of a strong study? What would be a study that is, sound? And a lot of, I think, Americans don't have the interest in like understanding like basic scientific principles. Mm-hmm. And so she kind of also was suggesting that the media needs to be more responsible in terms of some of the things that they're talking about, and some of the headlines, you know, it's like all children dying of COVID. Okay, there's been like 2 deaths, or do you know those kinds of things? Because what we know as scientists is the devil is always in the details, and we function in a world of probabilities, not certainties, right? And so how do you help people understand, like, I can't tell you there's a 0% chance of that doesn't exist. Outside of me telling you you're going to die, there's 100% chance of that. At some point you will die. And yeah, I just think, we need like 5,000 Neil deGrasse Tysons. We only have one, and he's a national treasure. But